Welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Gastambide, and I am the Director and Chief Curator of Public Art of the University of Houston System, one of the oldest and most significant university public art collections in the United States. I am so happy that you're joining us today for the third on-site, off-site, a monthly series of conversations with artists in our collection. This is part of Public Art's effort to recast our public programs into a virtual and further reaching realm. In the series, we're checking in with our artists to discuss a wide range of topics, from public art broadly to their commissions at the University of Houston System, to their changing studio practice, and of course, to life under COVID, the Black Lives Matter protest movement, and escalating social tensions in the United States. Before I introduce our moderator, I just wanted to let you know that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the conversation. We're planning a conversation that should last anywhere from 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're leaving 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. You'll notice that there's a chat box that you can feel free to type your messages in the chat box at any moment. Or the Q&A chat screen at any moment during the presentation, and we will be sure to get to as many of your questions as we can today. I'm very happy to introduce our moderator today. He is Mark Cervenka. He is a professor of art at University of Houston Downtown, and there he also directs the O'Kane Gallery. So with that, I will leave you to it. Welcome, Mark, welcome, Vincent, and welcome, Adriana. We're looking forward to this wonderful conversation. Thanks,
Maria. Thanks, and I just want to thank all the folks at Public Art at UH System, Maria, Mike, Brooke, and Addie over at Weingarten for helping to set all this up. And so happy to be talking with Vince and Adriana. Vince I've known for some time, and Adriana I'm happy to be getting to know. And so I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then I'm going to let them talk about their beginnings as artists, and then we're going to go through, hopefully, if we have time, about 4 works each, and then one collaboration, or 2 works each, and then one collaboration between the 2 of them. So Vince Valdez, native from San Antonio. In 2000, he graduated with a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design, and has kind of taken off from there. One of the first introductions I had to Vince was when we hosted Cheech Marin's collection, Chicano Visions, American Painters on the Verge. And included in that was his 2001 painting, Kill the Pachuco Bastard. So from there, he has gone on and has had solo shows around the world and residencies. Too many to really name. I'll name a few of those. Joan Mitchell Center residency, the Künstlerhaus Bethany Blue Star Contemporary Berlin residency, Vermont Studio, Skowhegan. He is currently has the Next Haven Fellowship in New Haven, Connecticut. He's had an Artadia Artist Grant and a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant. He's in the collections of the Ford Foundation, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Blanton Museum of Art at UT Austin, McNay in San Antonio, and of course the University of Houston Public Art Collection. So welcome, Vince.
Hey, thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Adriana, and then we'll let them talk. So Adriana is a native of El Paso, and received a bachelor's degree in 2008 from UTEP, El Paso. Got her MFA from UT Austin in 2013, and has really moved forward as well with exhibitions and honors, including the Joan Mitchell Foundation Emerging Artist Grant, McDowell Colony Grant, National Association of Latino Arts and Culture Grant. She, in 2018, was a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow at the Archives of American Art and History in Washington, D.C., a Black Cube Fellow, and also I wanted to mention she was a visiting artist at the 106th session of the United Nations Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances in Geneva, Switzerland. So with that, I'm going to just say that it's really nice to have both of you are here. You are in different cities, but you are a couple. So it's interesting to have two artists who are a couple that work together, and that you both have really some similar areas that you focus on in terms of your content, albeit with going about that with different styles and different ways of doing that. So what I'd like you to first do is to kind of just chat a little bit about how you're doing under COVID, and then maybe talk a little bit about how you began as an artist. And since both of you have such a strong social justice part of your thematic focus in your art, where did that come into play in your art? Was that originally there? Did it come simultaneous with your art? Did it come in after you began to see what art could do? And if you could just kind of talk about that and let us know how you're doing. Whoever wants to go first. Adriana, you want to go first?
Okay.
It says yeah.
Well, I would say mine began in my, in the landscape and the environment. And when I mean landscape, being my birthplace, El Paso, Texas, and the relationship between El Paso and Juarez, going back and forth between these two countries and being very observant. Those were my kind of beginning inquiries and that's when they started to take shape and form, and paying attention to the language, the culture, the diverse social and political environments, economic trade. And it just really granted me the opportunity to gain an understanding of how these two different countries operate, and then to just grasp that complexity, from also a transnational perspective. And so you couple that in with early on being exposed to my home and environment and the arts. For me, painting, orchestra, the opera, those were things that my parents exposed us to. And one piece in particular, the Francisca Goya 3rd of May, a painting that my aunt had painted for my father, which I thought she had painted originally, not a world famous painter. And so again, that sparked more inquiries, and just being very observant to the environment and the landscape. In terms of,
How old were you when you knew that the arts were something you wanted to pursue?
Probably just that exposure of having these paintings that my aunt had done for my father. Mm-hmm. That was the best way that I knew how to communicate. And I think doing these drawings with my brother or cousins, but realizing that there was something that I understood more innately than anything else. And there was a lot of medicine within my family, and I really love that too, but I really was just driven and struck by different visual languages.
Vince, how about you?
I started drawing when I was extremely young. I think I was drawing before I was talking, and it's such a comfortable, confident way for me to not only connect with the world around me, but communicate with it. And so but by the time I was about 9 or 10 years old, I still to this day consider one of my most important life experiences was when I started painting murals at that age. Because for me, that in many ways was my first real education. I spent those early years, all through my teenage years, painting, climbing up and down scaffolding in the various housing projects of San Antonio. And that really blew my perception wide open. It showed me several things that I made the commitment to at that point, to sort of continue this quest, right? To make work, to figure out how to use this this tool. It's how I was seeing art making, image making. Use it to utilize it to serve others, to tell stories about people and for people. Working in those housing projects, really gave me a hard dose of reality, right? Of the way that the world worked, but more importantly, the way that the system in America worked. And, and I think probably one of the most igniting experience, or I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think one of the things that really impacted me the most was looking around as I stood at the top of that scaffolding, seeing that the way it was communicating, even in the early stages of painting these murals, families would come out from the housing projects, individuals, and I saw the immediate sense of pride that they felt in these giant wall paintings, right? Because they saw themselves in these works. As I would step back and or sort of stare at them from way at the top of the scaffolding, I saw myself in them, right? Because all of these individuals mostly looked like me. And, and so I started to really connect these dots for myself. And to go a step further, I started to find the dots that were missing, right? As I'd go home at the end of the day, sit in front of the television screen, looking through magazines, and all around me, there were faces that didn't look like me, that I couldn't connect with, right? And so it was like this tale of two worlds for me. They were only separated from within a few blocks from my own community and these other communities that were that were divided by railroad tracks. And so that was it. I never really looked back. I wanted to begin this quest to use this work to really connect with others around me.
So how are you guys handling all our quarantining and COVID, and how's that going for you all and your artwork and anything else?
Go ahead, Adriana.
No, you can go. I went first last time.
Well, I've been in New Haven, Connecticut since early January. I will be here through all of next year, mostly because of COVID. The fellowship over at Next Haven, which is an amazing brand new fellowship founded by artist Titus Kafour. I'm in residence with 7 other artists here in the program. It's a year-long program, but because of COVID, we've had to hit the reset button because the intensive programming here has been stalled. And so it hasn't been, as most of us can probably relate to, it has not been an easy year by any means. Adriana and I have been separated for 7 months now. But I feel so fortunate that I have my work here, because if I didn't have a space to work, if I didn't have the outlet of channeling all of this sort of uncertainty back into this daily routine, I'm really not sure where I would be. And so I'm making the most of my time here in any way that I can to keep myself focused and busy. But I do got to say, one of the things that I sort of chuckle about is that I speak to my family, I speak to other friends, and they really are bouncing off the walls in terms of being quarantined in the house, isolated. For me, that's every day anyway, right? I'm isolated in the studio for months on end, so not much has really changed in my own routine.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for me, it's just such an unprecedented time, and it's an adjustment on many levels. You have the pandemic. There's been loss. There's been life. The thought of our health, the social unrest, and also just reflecting on, just a year ago, Vincent and I were at Mass MoCA and had just mounted the exhibition for the collaboration that we did, Requiem, and which to me embodies and it's a continuum of today and the past. And I think what's been interesting is that Denise Markunish, who's the chief curator at Masamoka, when the lockdown first began, she asked 10 artists, including Vincent and I, to contribute, a text and an essay about what does resilience mean to us. And so to have that pausing moment to really write down what resilience means to us, and then just to think about that in the past few months of being in this quarantine, and looking at our past, looking at our current state, looking at our future. And so those are some of the things that have kind of been going through.
It's a trying time for everyone. So thanks for sharing that. And talk about the piece that is part of the UH System collection, that is part of UH Downtown from 2007. And let you just kind of chat about your inspiration for that and how it came about for you.
Sure. I remember working on this piece. I created this when I was living out in Los Angeles. This was going to be part of a series that was my first solo show in Los Angeles at that time, over at Western Project Los Angeles Gallery. And the body of work was titled Winner's Circle. I think at that time, I was coming off the heels of creating some pretty extensive series of fictionally rendered boxers. Boxing for me was always such a powerful narrative that I revisit throughout the years. And the idea of this sort of underdog character, these sort of masculine archetypes that are sort of part of the tragic American narrative and experience. In this case, we see this individual who was whose portrait was based off of a fellow artist that I met over at Skowhegan a few years prior. And the title for me becomes as imperative as the portrait that you are encountering, right? Music for me is such a powerful influence in the studio because it is my only company in the studio normally. And so there's so many various crossovers and similarities, parallels between a musician, a painter isolated in the studio, trying to speak to an audience, and boxers. And so I think that this was by far one of my favorite images throughout the series. I adapted that title from Bob Dylan's Dream.
Yeah.
And I think in his version is our chances really were 1,000,000 to 1. I'll never forget working on this piece and having that song blaring in the background. That's it. There was already this sort of distant gaze, this search for something that goes beyond here, right? Beyond any one of us individually, beyond all of this that we encounter like this, I think that in an image like this, I'm thinking about how relatable it is, not only between myself and the character, but between all of us as in our own human experiences. That sometimes minute difference, that hairline difference between what is reality and what is dream. Right? So in this case, that play off the title, my chances really were 1,000,000 to 1. So is it this individual staring up, isolated in the universe, feeling alone, feeling like all odds are stacked against him, like the game is rigged, the fight is fixed. But even then, that easily he can take misfortune, despair, impossibility, or impossible odds, and that's all he needs is one single spark.
Yeah.
Just see past, right? To see the light at the end of the tunnel, and to be resilient, right? To sort of struggle, to carry on that struggle, right? And so, the stars for me, these sort of via Selman-like galaxies and universes, that anything is possible, that you just believe in your own vision, right? In your own quest.
And in a lot of ways, an appropriate piece for a university, right? Where you have students who are coming in and trying to figure out what their quest is going to be and start to reach for that. So it's been a great addition to our campus, I know, and I know well loved at the university. So thanks for that. Yeah. So we're going to move on, and Vince, we're going to look at a piece that is at the Blanton that was acquired at University of Texas at Austin, the City One, and it's a piece that got a significant amount of press, and one can look at it and understand maybe why that would be. It's a remarkable work, and I've got some details. I'm going to just flip through, and I'm going to let you kind of just give us I know you could talk about this for an hour, for 2 hours, but if you could give us a 5-minute shot on your thoughts about this, and we'll take it from there. And as you talk, I'm going to flip through and look at some of the details, okay?
Okay. So I began this piece in, I believe, September of 2015. At that moment in time, this was my way of confronting America, saying, America, there is no way that you are ready to coin yourself a post-racial society, right? On the heels of Obama, I started hearing this term get loosely tossed around in the media, in mainstream America. This was my way of confronting the elephant in the American living room, saying this subject, why is this not being screamed at the top of our lungs? This is everywhere that I look. This is on the screen, in the public education classrooms, in the courtrooms, in the prison systems, in the landscape itself. So I titled it The City. This was my fictional rendering of 21st century America. For far too long, America has convinced itself that this subject, that these people in these communities with this way of life, is relegated to the outskirts of our metropolitan cities and regions. That's, for me, that this image defies that myth, right? So when you follow loosely this lineup of a dozen or so hooded family members and friends from various communities, and if you start to look closely, you follow this sort of compositional lineup that leads from left to right, to the pickup truck on the right-hand side, down to the mud trail, back down into their home towns or communities, neighborhoods, in the sparkling inner cities. Now, there's, like most of this work, it's always densely layered, whether it's with personal experience and observations, right? And sort of art historical context, social political ideas and content. This is also an idea that I carried around with me for almost 2 decades before creating it. It was my memory of being 16 years old, and the one job that I ever had outside of doing artwork was flipping popcorn at the AMC movie theater at River Center Mall in downtown San Antonio. One afternoon, I walked out of work, and being 16 years old and sort of oblivious to what was in front of me, I'll never understand why I disregarded some yellow police tape that was blocking the door exits of the mall. I went right past them, underneath them, and then found myself staring down about 3 or 4 Klansmen in hoods, red and white hoods. And what seemed like to last an eternity was this confrontation, this staring contest. As I sort of widened my periscope, I realized that I had stumbled right directly into the center of a Klan rally in front of the Alamo in downtown San Antonio. Then I saw San Antonio Police Department's officers that were creating a human barrier between the hooded members and public citizens who were protesting their presence. At the end of that confrontation, or that stare down, what I assume was like the Klan dragon um, just very sort of patiently calmly looked at me and shouted out, "You don't belong here." And so I turned around and
Wow.
I walked back into the mall. On top of that, to go a step further in terms of art historical context, for me, it was extremely relevant at that moment in time to make a powerful statement as a Mexican-American Chicano citizen and artist. I was thinking about American artists who had come before me, like Philip Guston, painter Philip Guston, and his 1969 painting, City Limits, that shows a sort of cartoon Mickey Mouse-ish hooded Klan member in white gloves and white hood and his sort of toy car strolling about the cities. And I was thinking about another example, like American Black artist and poet activist Gil Scott-Heron and his song from 1982, The Klan. So this was my way of inserting myself as a brown American into this sort of American legacy. How many more generations of American artists will need to subject their work to ideas, to ideas that confront subjects like the Klan? Valdez, Guston, Gil Scott. Here are three legacies of three Americans from three different generations of three different shades, right? And so for me, it's this way of using this work to create my own bridges, right? To bridge communities, to bridge solidarity.
Yeah. Wow. So really powerful. I wanted to say one thing. There was a quote, I think when you gave your talk at the Blanton, you said, "I feel very strongly that America still finds itself trapped between the myth of who we think we were and the reality of who we really are." And that is kind of sitting at the crux, I think, of where you are with bringing this in a present day space. That
Sure. You know, I think if you've ever wondered what is the end result of mythifying our education, history, and reality in a sense, well, take a look around you today. It's here
Right.
in full force. This is the
Yeah.
end result of 2 generations, right? 2 centuries worth of the sort of mystical sort of illusion or disillusion, I should say, of what the American dream is and of what America, you know, is by nature. I mean, we are a nature founded on the heels of extreme violence and oppression and powers of struggle, right? And so this, for me, a scene like this that unfolds over 40 feet of canvas urges the viewer to think critically about what they think they might see or what they think they may already know. And so at the end of the day, after a year of painting this sort of staring contest that was going on back and forth between myself and this image, it was so much more about the landscape that bounds that entire horizon line from left to right and holds it together, keeps it there in place. Look past the photo bombing, because that's what they're doing. Is I imagined myself that I was up on a hill photographing or gazing down at this sort of beautiful landscape at night with twinkling lights, almost sort of in a Blade Runner-esque moments. And I got photobombed by these figures that appeared out of nowhere. Because if I can just encourage you to look at the landscape, to look between the crooks and crannies of their arms and the glimpses that open up between the figures, then the viewer may or may ask him or herself, why is the landscape relevant? Where is this? Where are we, right? What is that world down there? How does that radio tower signify something as important as the actual landscape, the vehicle, the cell phones, right? That torch being burned in the background, the smoke even. There's all of this, it becomes an entire codex of details that is waiting for you to discover them and to decode them.
All right. Adriana, let's look at two of your works, and I'm going to let you introduce this installation outside of El Paso, Texas.
Yes, so Unearthed Desenterrado is an outdoor site-specific artwork that speaks to the deeply rooted connections between the US and Mexico. And it's located near El Paso on the historic grounds of the Rio Vista Farm. And the installation features a solitary 60-foot flag hoisting a white cotton flag. And embroidered on one side of the flag is an illustration of, thanks, Mark, is an illustration of the Mexican golden eagle, and then on the other side is an American bald eagle, and they're each emblematic of their respective nation's patriotism. But this facility is really most notably known for its role as one of the Bracero program's key processing centers. And the Bracero program, established by the federal government during World War II, was one of the largest foreign worker programs in US history. And so there at the Rio Vista Farm between 1951 and 64, they processed there at the Rio Vista Farm about 80,000 Mexican laborers each year. And it is the only remaining processing facility in the US. And it is currently designated as a national treasure by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And they're also working to have it designated as a national landmark. But what was so captivating to me for this specific site is that what happened there to the men. And men were stripped and often fumigated, as there were their clothes and their luggage with the toxic chemical DDT upon entry into the United States. And then where they were toiled under difficult, unsanitary conditions, from railroad to the railroad industry to agriculture. And many of the braceros were also subjected to the DDT crop dusting in the agricultural fields. And so today, many people describe the program as a period of legalized slavery. And this is according to the findings of the National Trust. But it was also coming off of the heels for me in going to visit this place. I had done a year-long residency in Berlin, and there I was visiting a number of concentration camps, visiting memorials, monuments, and really starting to pay attention again to my surroundings, the architecture, the way that these kind of spaces are coalesced to marginalize people. And leaving Germany, coming back home and sharing a lot of the findings with my father, he said, have you looked in your own backyard outside of El Paso? And so visiting this space, it was hauntingly similar to a lot of the spaces that I had visited in Germany. And so again, when I'm looking at a lot of this work or creating this work, it's looking at it from a local perspective, a national perspective, and a transnational perspective.
Just a quick question. Can you talk about the fact that the flag is completely white and no color? What was your thinking in that?
Well, so the entire surrounding of the Rio Vista Farm are cotton fields. And so what goes into a lot of my work is a lot of research prior. And so again, it's looking at the landscape, looking at my environment. And I had been wanting to do a flag piece, but not necessarily knowing when and where and how, which is usually what happens within my practice. And it had been a long idea of wanting to use the Mexican flag and the U.S. flag, but the design and illustration was really brought to life by Vincent, and using them together. But it was really important to use the material from that very landscape. I worked with a company based in Texas, which is one of the only flag companies that still makes cotton flags. And it also really got legs with the fellowship that I had done with Black Cube under the direction of Courtney Stell. And so having that also support to realize a flag of that nature and that size was really important. Now, we left it out for 3 months, and over those 3 months, you can start to see in that image how the flag started to deteriorate. And in my mind, I just kept thinking about the bodies that are out in that landscape, that are not out there just for 3 months, but much longer. And that exposure, what does that do? Coupled in with the kind of pesticides or the fumigation system that's out there, what those bodies are being exposed to. And so when you see the flag now, it's deteriorated due to its elements, of that landscape.
All right. I want to get to a couple more pieces. So, and I want to talk about your collaboration Requiem. So, Adriana, if you could kind of introduce us to Susratur under Eraser and the connection with human rights, and give us a little background on this one, that'd be great.
Sure. So the title of the installation refers to Jacques Derrida's theory of erasure, and it pertains to the erasure of human life and the absence of rights. And so on the left side, maybe your right side, the etched tablets display the text from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it was, adopted by the UN General Assembly during World War II. And the burial plot, for me, exposes the void as a reminder of the lives lost, not only to war, but to the cyclical nature of injustice in a police state, especially against people of color. And the 500-pound bulletproof glass, for me, also addresses the inadequacy of national security and disproportionate protection of citizens under the rule of law. And again, this was another piece created after my time in Germany, and having the opportunity to be invited to sit in on these human rights violations, these sessions that had such an impactful experience. It was an impactful experience for me.
Yeah. We're gonna go to Requiem, but I just wanted to say that the Susratur ideal of something of words not being adequate to express is such an interesting dynamic with everything you've done with this particular thing in terms of the human rights maybe not being adequate to completely create an environment where that might be as possible as we'd like.
Yeah, and if you click to the image with the text, that piece is also really what helped me to figure out what to do with the wall for Requiem.
Got it.
So if looking at that image, and then once you see the other images, to keep that in mind, because the text is like, it's etched there, it's carved out. And so the other important thing with a lot of my works, and this also is included in the flag and this piece, those tablets were buried in that void, along with essays that I was talking about, what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were, and along with essays from the other artists that I did the residency with and the curator. And there sits a time capsule, and there's a time capsule underneath the flag, again, talking about kind of what was happening then, why was it created. And then Vincent and I also put a time capsule in Requiem.
Well, let's look at Requiem then.
Yeah.
And so we'll probably finish up with this one in terms of talking about your work, and then we'll have some questions. But if you guys could just introduce the piece as a collaboration, and I'll flip through a few images, and then I'm going to show a little video here.
Okay. Well, Requiem, I really attribute it to a drawing that I did in 2012, a large-scale pencil drawing with that same title, Requiem, of a collapsing, gasping American eagle. I had borrowed that title from a book.
I think Vince froze a little bit. Adriana, you want to take over till he comes back?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So let's see, where can I?
Tell you what, let me play the video, because when this piece opened in at Mass MoCA in is it North Adams, Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts, there was a procession to sort of open the exhibit. So let me see if I can play that real quick, and we'll hope Vince can come back. And I think we're good. Oh, probably not hearing it. Let me stop 1 second. Okay. All right. Can you see that, Adriana? Good. So we'll just do a minute or two of this, and then we'll come back and hopefully Vince will get back with us. Anything you want to add, Adriana, feel free. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So I'll let you guys take over and chat about your thoughts on this.
You want to finish up?
Yeah, I was saying I had borrowed the title from a prized book that I had encountered when I was in the 5th grade. I was obsessed with this book. It was by photographer Larry Burroughs, who was a war correspondent during the Vietnam War. And that title had such an impact on me, and so I extended it to this project. Many years later. For me, it was so symbolic of the way that I perceived American history. Whether it was through books like Larry Burroughs' Requiem book, or from stories of my father, who was drafted and served during the Vietnam War. Here was this sort of end result, this sort of endless cycle of neglected people in this country. And so this was my, when I started this sculpture, of providing a platform, a symbol, a counter monument, if you will, to common, ordinary people. And so this specific sculpture took 3 years to create, from the actual sculpting by hand, 950 pounds of clay in the studio, to the final phase, which was casting it in bronze in Houston, Texas. Somewhere along, I'd say about after a year and a half of working on this, Adriana and I started having these conversations about what it would mean to collaborate through this piece. And so we came up with the idea to use Requiem as a platform to involve 243 other Americans, citizens and non-citizens, 240.
Okay, I think that is your cue, Adriana, to talk about your wall.
Oh, there he's back on. Okay. Yeah. So and it's a little difficult to see, and I'm so sorry. But, oh, there we go. So we invited 243 people to contribute a significant date and text. And so what I did was actually carve into the drywall their selected date. And there was from the eagle to the wall, it was all done by hand, extremely laborious. But one thing that has been important within all of my practice too is this cataloging and creating a database. And so here I was essentially taking each date, reading the text, and then I would perform the carving, and just allowing myself to have that time with that date and trying to remember. And so this piece in particular, this wall, and thinking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that you had seen earlier, the presence of these voices and their histories and their significant dates. If you think about the history books, it's usually about who won the war, or who is able to tell the story. And in this way, I felt like it was Vincent and I inviting these individuals and then allowing it to be their stories. And so when you come into that space, and I think you could see in some of the other two pieces that I've done, it is inviting somebody to come in and unpack from multiple perspectives and ways, from the materiality to the subject to the history to the current state, to who's made it. And so you can sit with these dates. There was a pamphlet that you can open and read what each date stood for. And so in the space that they're carved into, they almost have this like bone-like quality, but also marble-like quality.
Yeah, I think something
Yeah.
else significant is that in the eagle itself, um, the patina in the foundry was determined by the mixture of each one of these 243 collected documents from individuals. Adriana reduced each one of those sheets of paper to ash, handed the ashes over to me. I took them to the foundry, we mixed them in the patina, and that's the end result. You know, it turned this ashen, charcoal, beautiful, meteoric black, you know, and for me, I think about, you know, again, individuals that have come before me that have attempted to do a similar thing, but in a much very different format. People like Howard Zinn and his publication, A People's History of the United States. This becomes a time capsule. It entombs the voices of the people, which is why we wanted to deliver it in a public procession.
Great. Well, I want to thank you guys. And I'm going to turn it over to Maria now. I know we could talk about this for a long time, but I'm going to turn it over to Maria with some time for some Q&A. So I'm going to stop the screen share and allow that to come back to Maria.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Adriana and Vincent, for such powerful testimony. We have a number of questions from our participants. They wanted to know if, for Adriana, one person wanted to know if if you could talk a little bit about the material of the flag, and if, as it decomposes over time, how do you address that, and so forth.
So after those 3 months, I brought the flag down, and it was made from cotton, which is a material that dematerializes much quicker than most flags that are made from some kind of poly blend. But because of the site, I wanted to make it out of cotton because the Rio Vista farm is encompassed by cotton fields. And that also has such a long history as well. And so the flag now is with me, and the hope is to have it continue to travel. It's already traveled to 2 venues where people can kind of see it in its deteriorated state.
Okay. We have several questions that have to do with how Requiem very much resembles a memorial. And now that everyone is thinking about memorials in the present climate, are you looking at that piece differently? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think if anything, it for me only further reiterates the significance of what I was trying to do when I began the piece, or when we began the piece in 2017, 16. You know, this idea of countering not only these sort of mythic notions of American history, right, of the American experience and narrative. For me, it's always been about countering this cloud of social amnesia that, you know, creates a fog around all of us, right? And so in this country, and I think that one of the things that always struck me about viewing monuments, memorials as a kid, especially growing up in San Antonio, Texas, where one of the first field trips that I ever took in school was to the Alamo, right? The Alamo itself, this sort of mythic Texan historic experience about how that narrative is supposed to shape even an individual like myself who's Mexican American, right? And so I'll never forget walking into the Alamo, standing before one of the obelisks or sculptures that was there, and sort of re-examining my own role, right, in my own hometown and community of San Antonio in Texas and America, because I could only see myself reflected in the dead bodies that were portrayed as the dead Mexicans, right? In these sorts of subjects and memorials. And so I really view Requiem as something that's for the people and about people. It's a chance to provide a platform so that people are finally heard. It's not about celebrating an over-glorified military general, politician, right? But more so, it's not about celebrating power, right? The significance of power in this country. It's about celebrating actually quite the opposite, right? The unheard, right? The unspoken, the forgotten. And starting with pieces like The City to Requiem, I mean, I'm really becoming more and more sort of blown away by how much more significant they seem to be becoming by the month even, you know, if not the year. And one of the inscriptions, Adriana, one of the amazing things she did at the end of that sculpture before we sealed it up permanently was each one of us, the foundry, myself and Adriana, we created our own little time capsules and submitted them, entombed them inside the body of that collapsing eagle. And one of the scripts that I wrote in that time capsule was a quote by Gore Vidal, who once said, "We are the United States of amnesia. We learn nothing because we remember nothing." And again, this was our chance to sort of set that record straight.
Thank you. So it's really interesting that you brought up the idea of monuments, of the possibility of maybe monuments to the unseen. One of our participants was asking what opportunities may be present in your work in terms of highlighting what is not being told through monuments, and maybe that's what I am taking away. I did have a comment for both of you. In many ways, both of your works are about exposing the many sorts of inequitable systems that are present in our lives. I wanted to know, as a sort of a closing commentary, if you could maybe tell us, amidst this climate, what hope do you hold on to as you're thinking about your work? What do you hold on to?
Adriana?
I think what I hold on to, especially in reference to this piece in particular, is really upholding these voices and these dates. This is a record. I see this piece as an organic living thing. Even though it's no longer standing at Mass MoCA, the fact that it can be reinstalled and have more dates and continue to reflect people's voices, and just the importance of documenting even our own oral histories. I think beginning with that, that's what I hold on to, others' voices and upholding them and working through that resilience.
I think at a moment like this, it's more than ever is it necessary, absolutely important, to remind ourselves that we are not alone in this struggle, in the struggles that we are facing. History, if anything, should teach us and continue to remind us that the experiences of human struggle throughout the history of this world, throughout mankind, has always been an uphill battle. This isn't a new experience by in any way, much less the American experience. This isn't something that is relegated only to the United States of America in the 21st century. Because of this, it's going to absolutely be necessary to prepare the next generations by correcting history to a more accurate, portrayal about truth, the truth, but we cannot face our own truths until we're willing to confront our past. And I find tremendous amount of hope in the idea that each one of us must be active and willing participants in testifying about our own observations and examinations and of our own experiences in this world. And I think that when we look throughout history, the record keeping for generations, for centuries now, has come from artists, right? And so we must ask ourselves consistently, don't forget to ask ourselves why it is that artists, especially in a state like Texas, are almost always, when it comes to the education system, pushed aside, right? Creative thinking, critical thought, creativity in terms of thinking outside of the box, seeing beyond yourselves, seeing beyond our borders, seeing beyond this generation and this century, right? We must think ahead. And I think that artists have always been provided these sort of social antennas, right? It's up to us to listen carefully.
Thank you for that. That was both of y'all have, I think in many of us feel that you're two of the strongest artists that live and work out of Houston, and we're deeply grateful that you spend this time with us. We're really, really grateful. You're both generous spirits, and we wish you both the best. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who participated. Thank you to Mark for this wonderful conversation. And if I could, there is a exit poll, a little feedback that we would deeply appreciate if you could help us with by filling it out. Also, I wanted to mention that this is the third of our monthly series. We have at least one other conversation planned for August, so we'll keep everyone informed. But thank you, and we're looking forward to many more opportunities to come together. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.